Again, welcome back to Focus on Liberia. Our topic, memorialization of the Liberian Civil War. What does the TRC recommend on the rewriting of Liberia's history and the use of wartime memory? My guest, Mr. Aaron Weah, is a transitional justice expert, and he's joining us. He's a research guy, man, and he's joining us from the UK. Aaron, briefly, uh, for my audience, first of all, let me mention that you were joining us the last time. You couldn't because of technical issues. So we are happy to have you this time. So for those who are meeting you for the first time, let's say something brief about Mr. Weir.
Thank you again very much, Dennis, for having me. I'm Aaron, I'm Aaron Weir. I'm based in the UK. I'm a full-time PhD researcher at the Ulster University. My research is concerned with investigating local practices of memorialization in Liberia. I'm looking at 1979 through 2017. I'm really concerned about how local communities across the country are remembering the Civil War. The reason why this is of concern to my research, and it should be of concern to anyone, uh, memory is such a very important part of how society heal, uh, and because the war impacted ethnic groups in different ways, so different ethnic groups, different families have the tendency of remembering the war in a way that may be counterproductive towards issue of peace and stability. So the studies of memory studies or the studies in general around memory suggest that issue concern society emerging out of conflict, how memory is being used, whether it's being used constructively, whether it's being used destructively, is very important. So, for example, uh, the Duporo massacre, for example, if you have people remembering the Duporo massacre, sending out messages that target a particular ethnic group as being responsible, is a problem in memory studies. It can be a form of retribution. If you have another group in Lofa County, the survivors of the Begadu massacre were over 500 Liberians, mostly of ethnic Madingos and ethnic Bandis, mostly Muslim that were affected. If they choose to remember that particular incident that happened sometime in June 1990 in a way that is counterproductive to peace and stability, then we have a problem. So my work is essentially trying to investigate these different forms of memory happening across the country. On the overall, how are communities coming out of the war remembering this violent period? Are they remembering it in a way that is helping the peace and stability, or are they remembering it in a way that is casting expressions on different ethnic groups, that is casting expression on different groups in ways that threatens the peace and stability over time? So that is really the focus, of my research, and so I'm hoping we can have a conversation today about what specifically did the TRC recommend, how are the recommendations being taken forward, and what is the overall value of these recommendations?
Yeah.
What will change? What will change if these recommendations are adhered to and if they are implemented? How are memorialization taking place in other countries around Africa, and how has it helped? And what are the ongoing challenges in these countries, places like Rwanda? We can talk about that just so that we use all the context to share light on the value of memorialization in general. I know it's a big terminology, it's a
Right.
multi.
And that's why I want us to start first. What
Okay.
is memorialization?
So memorialization is basically the practice of applying memory.
Right.
So memory first begins in our head. We remember things, but the process through which that is applied, where community get together and they put this idea down, and maybe it's written down. They use commemorative wordings. They come up with a monument, whether it's a static monument,
Mhm.
It can take on different forms, but it essentially involves the practice through which community try to remember a particular event or a particular place or a particular occurrence. So that it is that practice that is referred to, as memorialization. It's also a process of negotiation with the past. How community get involved with negotiation, and we can talk more about uh, what is meant by negotiation, because
Right.
in this process of negotiation, there are a lot of
And we can come to
fraction
that because I still have question on this
and
memory thing because this
okay,
is an
let's go one
individual
step
thing.
at a time.
Yeah, individual thing, right? So I
Mhm.
remember it because I was in the Civil War, so I remember. So when you say community, collective memory is like Aaron, Maine, and Sonny, we get together to remember something because I have my own memory. I know what happened. You may have not experienced what I experienced. So memory, how does it apply to a community?
So let's it apply to a community in in the sense that there is a shared memory. There are so many different memory, but
Mhm.
there is a shared memory. There is one major memory that in a way concerns or brings a lot of people together in a community. So we use Dubo Road, the Dubo Road waterside, which was used in 1990 as a killing field where
Right.
people were killed there, and there was also a few pockets of mass graves here and there. In 2008, when I was working for the New York-based International Center for Transitional Justice, I made a lot of visits. I made a lot of visits there, and through my visit and interaction with the community, I realized the Duboro waterside became a symbolic reference to the wider Duboro community that wanted to remember the atrocity that took place. A number of people in the community had some of their loved ones who were killed there,
Right.
even though everyone have their own stories.
Right.
But in most cases in a community, there is one violent event, especially in the period of a civil war. There is just one violent event to which everyone seemed to have some connection. And it is in this case where community memorialization is important, because the community is now coming together with a proposal. How do we remember this? I lost my uncle here. You lost your father here. You lost your son here. How do we come together? How do we remember this? Because the whole one of the value of memorialization is that it has a preventative it has a
Mhm.
preventative value, that if we remember this in a certain way, we are likely to avert the fate of a reoccurrence. This is one of the value of memorialization, and that's why studies around memorialization is encouraged for it to be as consultative and as broad-based as possible, because there's so much emotions involved. All those who are connected to such a place is important that they have a voice, that they have a stake, because again, in community memorialization, there is a direct form of forgetting that take place, or amnesia. If
Yeah.
you have one or two prominent persons that were killed in a particular place, there is a tendency that the remembering of that place is overshadowed by these huge personalities,
Right.
and other people who lost equally important loved ones there are easily offended. That's why community memorialization can be a very sensitive. It can be a very sensitive issue. It has to be dealt with in a rather important way. Secondly, people with political connections sometimes overwhelm the process by being a little too involved, and at the expense of other people. In other cases, other people will make the argument that our ethnic group suffer here the most. So we
Mhm.
are more entitled, we have more legitimacy to direct how the remembering takes place. And so there's so much dynamics that is involved with
Right.
how community come together to remember, how community determine what language to use in the overall remembering process.
Right.
So this is just an example of how community memorialization unfolds, the level of negotiation that take place there, and ultimately the message that comes out of it.
Right. At the center of that memory or the memorialization or remembering is fact or the truth. That
Yeah,
is, we must all agree that this actually happened. You know,
yeah,
Who is responsible for this? Is it those that were there or those that were being told the story? How do we come to establish that this is actually what took place and this is what we need to do?
So it's good. So there are two things here. One, if this process of applied memory, which is a form, which is also memorialization, is taking place in a wider context where there's already been an investigation,
Right.
like in the case of Liberia, where the TRC, part of the TRC objective was to be able to uncover the truth and the facts around the civil war. So it means all the 205 sites of massacres, and that have been uncovered and recorded in the TRC report. There is a basic understanding that the facts about what happened to these places are already recorded. And when we say the facts, we're talking about the date the incident happened. We're talking about the warring factions responsible. We're talking about the identity of those killed at those places. We're talking about the gender of those of those killed. Possibly, we're also talking about the demographics. If we have about maybe 300 persons killed at a particular massacre, normally a truth commission will break down the victims involved in there. Sometimes you will have a fairly good sense because all of these details amount to the truth, and not having the full extent of the detail will mean that the full truth, of such an incident, is still not fully established. So the official truth sometimes is instructive about how at the local level people engage with that.
Yeah.
But there is a caveat here. Sometimes at the local level, the their notion of that truth is in tension with the official truth.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are contesting that what is being recorded as the official truth is inconclusive. The local community sometimes argue that they are in possession of more evidence, more detail about what happened, and some of that is as the result of survivors' own truth who lived through the ordeal, who are telling you that long before the TRC was established, I live here. I was there during the very night this incident
Yeah.
happened. I know what really happened. So memorialization can be very emotive. There's so much emotion involved, and that's why the entire process is considered a negotiation with the past. And what you see as a truth, how much of that truth is subjective, and what is the official truth about this very place that you're trying to remember.
Thank you. And you already stated, the importance of memorialization, and one of the reason is so it can serve as a learning place, so that we don't go back to the past. We come from a society like Liberia that is so religious, that talk about forgiveness. Let's forgive and forget. Love, according to the Bible, does not keep records of wrongs, and we need to reconcile and get this war thing. Let's move past it. It has already
Mhm.
happened. How does the teaching or our religious upbringing fall in line with memorialization, or clash with that concept as a way of moving forward?
That's a very good question. So some religion uh, do not believe in the whole concept of trying to memorialize in a manner and form that we have come to see happen, uh, like having a monument with the names of those who were killed, having a monument of those who work on the committee, or other forms of memorial can involve a requiem mass, like what happened every July 29th and 30th at the St. Peter Lutheran Church. A requiem mass is having a commemorative memorial service to pay respect to those who were killed, as in other culture, like in Peru and other places, women gather at the sites of their loved ones and they burn candles, they burn incense. So memorialization can take on different forms. It can take on the form of a ritual ceremony. It can take on the form of of a commemorative event. It can take on the form of a religious event. It can also take on the form of a monument, or as you may have heard about in South Africa, the quilt, where victims or loved ones who lost their loved ones to the AIDS pandemic,
Right.
they sat down and they weave together a beautiful quilt. In that quilt, they put the names of their loved ones. So this is just a few example of the different forms. Sometimes we think about memorialization only in a monument, but
Mm,
it goes beyond that. It can take on so many different forms. So coming to your question, whether this practice is sometimes in tension with a religious practice, in a way, yes. Our brother in the Islamic faith are very cautious about the issue of remembering, and in what form it takes. You wouldn't easily find uh, people in the Islamic faith using a monument to remember those who died. It is incompatible with the Islamic form of worship. So on that note, yes. On the other hand, I will tell you this story about this community in central Liberia, the Same community. When I was doing some initial research there in 2008, I got to know that in 1993, during the fall of Banga, this community got badly affected. The total 37 of its members were killed. The community today has erected a monument. Uh, Through my many back and forth to the community, I realized that one of the resident of the community told me in the story that in 1999, 2000, there was this occurrence of elders of the community having dreams about some of those who had died. And in one of the dreams, one of those persons who were killed made his appearance. And and the interpretation of this dream suggested that one of those who died were very displeased with the way the community was easily forgetting them. So I'm trying to give you a picture here
yeah.
how, on the one hand, remembering may be incompatible with certain religious practice, and on the other hand, how people's sense of remembering may be reinforced through African tradition.
Yeah.
It is a common practice in African tradition that if you have dreams, maybe the dream is coming, is a very recurrent phenomenon where you're having this dream one time, two times. It is suggesting that something should be done. And in this community, a memorial has been established in response to this recurrence of dreams.
What must happen before memorialization occur, or what are some of the steps? And let me explain where I'm coming from. Let's take the every 1980 there were 13 plus killed,
Yeah,
and every year the families of the 13 men or 14, including President Tubber, they have a program to commemorate the dead and or their loved ones. And there
yeah.
has been criticism that there were those killed were not only the officials, there were other people that were fighting to defend President Turbot in the mansion, but they are not being remembered. If, for instance, people of President Turbot, they are remembering him, or like President Doe, and some feel, well, this man was a monster who killed our people, and why are you remembering him? And so there, there are some unintended consequences when we are remembering people. So, what are those things that must take place so that remembering someone or remembering your loved one does not cause problem or bitter feeling for the people who is perceived to have victimized?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and I hope uh, some of those listening in may want to follow through with this. You have asked a very important question, a question that is actually at the center of memorialization in general. So to begin with, memorialization everywhere is deeply a social and political process. It is a process in which there is a lot of power, a power play. There's also a process through which people feel more entitled to how the narrative around a certain event ought to be developed, ought to be constructed. So on the story about the 13 persons killed and how today, every time, because there's the April 22nd memorial group that has come up, that memorial group is largely shaped by the direct victims, of the family of those who were killed on the 22nd of April 1980.
Right.
The perspective that you are mentioning, that there were other ordinary Liberians who were killed doing their day in service to their country, in service to former President Talbot, who have not been acknowledged. Uh, this is in memory studies referred to as counter memory, where a dominant memory is being confronted from below. So you have a smaller family of ordinary people who are not as prominent as those comprising the 13 families that were killed or who suffer, and are now beginning to protest that why are we not acknowledged. This is a major part of a memory studies where these counter memory or protests, normally come about. That's why one of the standard practice around memory is that it has to be broadly consultative.
Yeah.
All those involved, all families concerned with the violence, all families affected directly or indirectly, has to be involved. And this is where it gets complicated because some family feel a greater sense of legitimacy that who are you, to come and tell me the extent to which you should be involved when I've lost, my husband, when I've lost my son, and the only effect you have had is that you have had a distant relative affected. So you see how sensitive it can become. It can be a very sensitive matter, but that's why a memorialization process is also susceptible to falling apart if it is not consultative, if it doesn't reflect the consensus of all those involved, if it is not reflective of the general aspiration of all those that feel affected, that feel belong to this particular event, that feel a part of the story that should be told. They sometimes come up with a protest memory. A protest memory is a common occurrence when the consensus building around a particular memorial event breaks down. Then you have family coming up with alternative memory, as a direct protest, to a memory where they feel excluded. So it's a big part of it is a big part of the overall process of memorialization. It's a deeply social and political process where negotiation of the past, and is a main part of the discourse that normally inform the entire process.
And what is the role of the state in that process so that it becomes consultative? It doesn't engender strife or it doesn't have um, counter effect.
So the role of the state is also not free of its own controversy. So the role of the state uh, is can equally be problematic, but that the level of problem can be reduced if 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 the state try to involve as much people as possible or invest in a more elaborate process of trying to tell a full and comprehensive story. So let's begin with South Africa, with the Apartheid Museum. So the Apartheid Museum goes back to the 18th century, 18th to 19th century, and trying to tell the story about the Boer and the Afrikaans War, and it walks, it just goes step by step to the apartheid period in 1962-64, when the law that made it legal for people to discriminate on the basis of color. Apartheid was legal. Apartheid was constitutional. So it went through that step-by-step process, and then you have today a very big museum, that is generating so much money for the society. Everyone goes there. I mean, it's a very emotional place to go to. There are videos that were caught from the Soweto massacres There were videos that being reproduced, going way back into the 60s and in the 70s. So I'm using the South African example as one of those few places where is less controversial. But even the Afrikaans, they have a different feedback. They have a different reaction to the Apartheid Museum. They think the emphasis is too much on their wrongdoing. It's not balanced. So there are a little bit of disagreement. So let's move to Rwanda. The memorial in Rwanda is being heavily led by the state.
The government,
Eh,
yeah.
Yeah, the Paul Kagame regime. Uh, the criticism that the Rwanda memorial or memorialization process is having is that even though Paul Kagame is calling for one Rwanda and he has imposed on the society one ethnic identity, there is a feeling that uh, there is still the Hutu and the ethnic divide that is there, and that much of the memorialization is talking more about Hutu as perpetrators and Tutsis as victims. So it is there. Academics have criticized uh, the Rwandan approach as mimicking too much the Holocaust approach, and there is this academic who referred to it as a dark form of tourism. So state involvement in memorialization is also not free, of criticism. However, what it does is that it provides a space for a broader reflection on the conflict where people can go to, foreigners, locals, nationals can go to one place and say, yes, I remember this April 6th. This memorial is on the April 6th. I remember this other component of this memorial is on the fall of Banga. I remember this is about the 1990, the atrocities that happened in 1990. So if the Liberian government, I remember in 2017, 18, Vice President Joe Howard Taylor hired me and a few other persons to develop a proposal to establish a wartime memorial. I didn't know that the Vice President of Liberia lost I think her mom and her parents at the Phoebe massacre. So we have a sitting Vice President, who's also a victim, of the loss of loved ones. So I got to know this when I was involved with developing this project with Vice President Joe Howard Taylor, who's very open about her loss in the Civil War in the Phoebe area, and I thought it was a very brilliant idea, for Liberia to first begin by having a war memorial, a place where foreigners and Liberians who are born after the peace agreements, Liberians who are too young to remember what happened, and can go to such a place and learn from it. And memory, around the world has also been turned into new civic spaces where important existential questions about the past, is triggered. What happened here? Who did this? Why did this happen? So state-led memorialization creates new civic space and new areas, for 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 the younger generation to talk about. Just before I end here, I want to make a reference to Japan. The the Japanese government has remembered the atomic bomb in two important ways. So you heard about the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki uh, 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 bombing.
Yeah.
So 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 there is this 6 acres of land where the Japanese government has established a park where kids go to after school and hang out. This is one form of memorialization that the Japanese government has engaged with. The second one is that they have built the study of the atomic bomb in the curriculum for kids in school in classes like sixth grade, seventh grade, and eighth grade. So every Japanese student who go through Japanese schools can tell you basic facts about the atomic bomb. That is a very interesting form of memorialization. So memorialization is just not confined to a place. It can also be built into a curriculum,
Yeah.
to pass on important message about particular historical events. So in Japan, is part of the learning process. Kids go through from sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, learning about 1945 when Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was consumed in flames. So the part of the memory process there is that they are learning about this through textbooks.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. My guest, Mr. Aaron Weir. He's a transitional justice expert. We are discussing memorialization of the Liberian Civil War, and what we're going to look at will be what did the TRC recommend when it comes to memorialization and rewriting Liberia's history. And Aaron, I read your paper, which declining ethnic relations in post-war Liberia, the transmission of violent memories. And I want to read a portion of what you wrote as a segue into what the TRC say about memorialization. Here's what you wrote in that paper. Unless the state directs the process of post-war memorialization advanced by the TRC, unfiltered memories of the war will be passed down to successive generations, and consequently, generations and consequently, residual ethnic cleavages will be ignited, thereby creating reduced levels of cooperation across ethnic groups. That is so profound. Explain to my readers what you mean.
So on the one hand, I'm suggesting that after conflict, it's important for the state to play a central role in directing how society learn from the past. And I'm being careful here when I say the state playing a role. I'm speaking more in a normative term, that you will have a leadership, that is very conscientious, that is very careful with the history of the conflict, and not partial about the interpretation of the history. Because if you have a state and you have a leadership that is partial in handling, such sensitive history, that is going to lead to further problem. So like I mentioned in the case of Japan, where the Japanese government has reflected on the destruction caused by the atomic bomb, and have found through pedagogy, one of the most effective way to teach the upcoming generation is to put this, to reduce this to textbooks. It's in the same case of Liberia. We've seen the civil war where ethnicity and religion was used as a tool to mobilize young people into fighting units. You now want a new government to carefully react to that, to let people know that the extent to which we are divided along ethnic lines has been exaggerated by politicians. I maintain very strongly that Liberians are not as divided ethnically as we've been made to believe.
Yeah.
And it is only a government, very truly conscientious government, who can handle such history of the conflict, and turn it around for good, so that today and next year we're going to be 20 years after the Accra Agreement. How many young kids have looked back at the Liberian conflict and developed new opinions, and that do not reduce someone who come from a particular ethnic group to stereotypes that we were growing up knew about. That the man from Grand Bassa is this kind of person. The man from Bon County is this sort of person. These stereotypes are still there. These stereotypes were used to further some of the conflict, during the Civil War. So part of that piece that I wrote in this paper is basically to put the state at the center of how memory is used, so that it can minimize the role for too many interpretations to one conflict. Too many interpretations is good, but when the state is absent, then you have no center of gravity. You have no opportunity for real learning. Liberia is still one of the few countries, more than 20 years after conflict, where we do not have one curriculum on the wall, and that's a problem. We're not reading from one script. If you have your kids today in Liberia, they're all coming back home with different interpretations of the war. Now, don't get me wrong, it's okay to have different interpretations, but if that interpretation is coming from one source, then it's good. But if the interpretation is being informed through misinformation, if that interpretation is being formed through the casual transmission of memories, and from different households, people interpretations of what they think the war was about, then that is a problem. So my advocacy to have a conscientious state, lead on the interpretations of war memories, so that it minimizes the extent to which there are lies, it minimizes the extent to which there are misinformation, is very, very paramount in my own understanding and in my own study. So that's why I'm pushing for the state to be a little more involved here.
And when I read that, when you say, if this is not done, you have unfiltered memories of the war being passed down to successive generations. And according to you, that's going to result into residual ethnic cleavages being ignited. When I first read it, I said, but why do you want to control how people think? Why isn't it left with people how they want to interpret the war or what they felt? Because people felt this at different points. And that's why we had this many uh, defense forces. So
Yeah.
it's like everyone has his own story, what happened. But now you are saying the state should come in and control, if I'm using the right word, how people should remember the war.
Yeah, and I want to put this into context. So when I mean the state should come into control, one, I'm speaking in terms of
Curriculum.
rewriting the Liberian history,
Okay.
having a curriculum that is reviewed and approved by the state. I'm talking about centers of learning, as in a museum, as in having one war memorial, because the process leading to establishing a war memorial is so thorough. You have anthropologists, you have sociologists, you have political scientists, you have a whole team, of educators that are involved in creating, one narrative for society to benefit from. You are in the U.S. You know about the Civil War memorial. You know about the Vietnam memorial, and the protests that led to the Vietnam Memorial and a new memorial to be constructed, where people felt that they were not captured in the first Vietnam Memorial that was developed. In fact, the Civil War Memorial, there was a lot of problem with how blacks were represented in the Civil War Memorial. They were not fully acknowledged. If Liberia reaches the point where uh, it's been agreed that yes, we need to establish a war memorial, it's going to take maybe the next 5 to 10 years, and it's going to involve all of the right professionals. And with all of the right professionals coming down and agreeing on a common strategy, on a common criteria, what should we include, what should be left out, what is good for the society, you're going to have ultimately, a synthesis, of a narrative that is ultimately going to benefit the younger generation. There will be a form of learning that would just be empowering. There will be a form of learning, that will be very cathartic. And memories are designed to be cathartic, where they help people reflect. And so when I spoke about the state should control, I was speaking about it in these terms. I was not speaking about it in a very loose way. Now, what we have in Liberia, we have no history of the conflict.
Okay.
Every kid's going to school can tell you so many different things about what the Liberian Civil War was about.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know I asked this question before, but let me use this as we go into what the TRC said. Sua Mampo said, after the war, let's focus on moving forward, Liberians. So I don't know whether what Mampu is saying is, hey, there's no need to memorialize. Let's move forward. Let's forgive and forget. Let's go forward. I know we spoke about that in the beginning, but whatever way you understand that, can you say to Sua Mampu?
Yeah, Mabu, well, thanks for your participation, but she's not giving up much to work with.
Okay.
Let's move forward. What does that really mean, Mapu? I mean, if you can be a little more specific,
Yeah.
is that a byword for, let, as people say, let the dead bury the dead? Sometimes we use these phrases to mean let's move forward, but moving forward is not as easy, as people would like to suggest,
Yeah.
because our past, our present is shaped by our past, and we pretend that we are able to just move on, but it's difficult for a
Yeah.
society such as Liberia, where the you are reminded every day by the atrocities I mentioned earlier. There are 205 sites of massacres around Liberia. How can someone in River says that recalls the second highest size of massacre ever move on when all across River says is a graveyard, if we can
Wow.
call it that? How can
Mm.
how can a kid grow up in a place where 30 sites of massacre, he has to live with it, he has to coexist with the horrible stories about what happened in those places in Lofa, which represents which has the highest size of massacre? How can people easily move on there? It's easy to be in Monrovia. It's easy to be in different parts of the world where most of us have tried, have gone through self rehabilitation to speak about other people. It's easy for us to be able to rationalize that yes, we can move on, but it's not easy for other people whose life are still conditioned, whose life are still hinged or still locked into the civil war period. It's difficult,
Yeah.
and to suggest let's move on. I mean, the risk with that is that we will pretend that yes, the society is healing, and before you know it, you have a team of young Liberians who feel disenfranchised because their parents were killed during the war, and as a result, they have not developed to their full potential. So you will have a new conflict on the horizon, and I'm concerned about that most of the time. There are young Liberians who may come back, to interrogate their underdevelopment, and they could blame that on the Liberian War and how
Yeah.
it impacted their parents, and how, as a result of their parents and dying early, they have nothing to show for, and they may want to reclaim their rightful place in society. So some of these things are not easy as wishing that it just go away.
Yeah. No, I agree because I, for one, lived through the war and came to the United States in 2000. And because of the war experience, especially going through checkpoints, for the first 10 to 15 years, if I went through a toll booth, I was traumatized. I couldn't go through a toll booth without remembering. So just imagine someone, and I was in Bannersville, so someone still in the same area where these things happen, it will really, really be difficult to move on. So I agree with you. So now
Yeah,
let's come to the TRC. We started by saying, I asked the question about the truth, that we should be able to establish something, so that's something that all of us can come and write. You said you give an example of the TRC being able to document these things and make recommendation on memorialization. I'm going to put some of them on the board. I'm going to read them quickly, and then we can go through them if you want to, whatever way you can. So the memorialization recommendation in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Consolidated Final Report. Number one, national holiday, preferably National Unification Day, be renamed National Unification and Memorial Day. Memorial sites built in capital cities of each county to include every site of massacre. Assistance to rebuild shrines and holy places and rehabilitate desecrated traditional, cultural, and religious institutions. National Memorial Ceremony and Tomb for President William R. Tolbert. National Memorial Ceremony and Tomb for President Samuel Kayando. Prince Johnson to account for remains of Samuel K. Doe, especially the skull. Issuance of death certificates to all those surviving heirs of those who lost their lives during the Civil War and are to date without legal evidence of death. Death certificate for Christopher Imodibi and Tayo Awutusin, both from the Guardian and Champion newspapers. Press Union of Liberia to hold appropriate memorial service in their honor and all other journalists who fell during the Civil War. Government of Liberia to issue public apology to people of Liberia for the conflict and loss of human life and destruction of properties. The government to issue public apology to governments and peoples of West African nations and other foreign nationals for death of their citizens during the Civil War. The government of Liberia to issue public apology to each government that committed troops to peacekeeping missions for death of their soldiers. The building of a new political culture, tolerance and respect for human rights of all people, including opposition, Government represents the people. The right to vote remains inviolable. Partisans' use of democratic institutions should be outlawed. Political control of military should be outlawed. The culture of extermination of political opposition should also be outlawed. Party politics in the military, the civil service, and paramilitary institutions be outlawed by statute, under which it should be unlawful for this category of citizens to campaign, to wear party t-shirts, paraphernalia, participate in parade and rallies, or be a member of any political party. Aaron, that's a lot from the TRC recommendation.
Yeah.
Where you want to start?
Why don't we take it one at
Yeah.
a time? Yeah. So just flash the first one. Let's read it.
So from the beginning,
Yeah.
What's the goal of the TRC, the overall goal of all these things that they're saying?
So the memorialization component of the TRC recommendation was intended to prescribe a process whereby both the state and community and individual will follow a format or how to remember the war, how to remember personal losses, the state responsibility in the process that will lead to some form of closure. So let's take the issuance of death certificate and the rationale behind it.
Yeah.
Up to today, there are some Liberians who lost who loved ones left the house in search of food or safety, and they'll never seen again. They'll never seen again. Some parents still think that one day they will wake up and their son will just walk to the door. The TRC is suggesting here that after 5 years, if you never heard about this person and at the end of the Civil War, there are no report, the Liberian state should take the responsibility to declare, to help that family find closure, to declare that person, that son, that daughter, that husband, or that wife who has never been seen since 1990, 1991, 92, after so many years, for the Liberian government to issue a death certificate with a Liberian seal on it and say, we're sorry, we cannot have you mourning perpetually. We want to hereby declare that this your missing person from 1990 is dead. The state making that declaration comes with a certain level of closure, comes with a certain level of healing. So when the TRC was designing this recommendation, it was thinking about the thousands of Liberians who left their home looking for food and never returned.
Yeah.
Today you have people around in America, in Asia, who do not know, what happened to this person. No one heard about him. Where he's, even if he's died, even if this person died, where was he buried? So at least, during Decoration Day, there can be some level of respect paid. So that recommendation was designed to address that particular level of grief that parents, loved ones, are suffering.
National holiday, preferably National Unification Day, be renamed National Unification and Memorial Day. I mean, Unification Day, we go and clean graves, but nobody is cleaning my father's grave. Go ahead.
Yes. So this recommendation was, in my view, was largely intended to have unification, which was a word that was introduced under the Tubman administration, and Memorial Day come together, as one holiday. On the one hand, unification would be, is intended to bring towards a divided society together, and then the Memorial Day is meant, to also have those who were killed and who are buried in a mass grave, who do not know where their loved ones were buried, can use the Memorial Day as an opportunity, to help to remember their loved ones. Again, I have to add here that in other countries where a number of people were killed in mass grave and they were never, and no one knows the exact place where their loved ones were buried, there was this cenotaph. Cenotaph is a form of a memorial erected in honor of someone who real grave is unknown.
Yeah.
So you have a cenotype erected. So if, for example, at the Dubo Road, the government can establish a particular Dubo Road cemetery that accounts for thousands of people killed. I know a few families who do not know where their loved ones were killed, but they heard that the person may have been killed on Dubo Road. So if you have the Dubo Road Township working along with the government of Liberia to erect and to first agree on a parcel of land where all of these cenotypes are erected to commemorate the thousands of Liberians who were killed in that place and their loved ones do not know their real grave, can go there on every decoration day or
Yeah.
unification and memorial day to pay their last respect. One of the advantage of this, I don't know when last you went to Liberia, but if you go to the cemetery and see where people loved ones are buried, it's so disorganized. And I think in African tradition, where people are buried is really sacred.
Yeah.
And it is normally intended to be very clean. One of the good things of the whole memorialization concept and project is that it will help to reorder these sacred places. If we have a very conscientious government that is paying attention to, the respect given to people who have died, and will really help to reorganize society when it comes to, how graveyards and cemetery,
Yeah.
should be looked after. So the whole idea of this memorialization will really help to restructure, uh, you know, uh, graveyards and places of mourning, and give it some bit of decency.
I
Yeah.
agree. We say National Memorial Ceremony and Tomb for President Turbot, President Doe, and that Prince Johnson produced the body or the skull of President Doe.
Okay, so let's begin with President Talbot. President Talbot was assassinated. We all know that story. And up to now, it's been disputed where he was actually buried. Where was he really buried? There is a site at his Palm Grove Cemetery. He wasn't buried alone, he was buried in a mass grave. The TRC is suggesting that he remains and is exhumed and properly reburied, an act befitting of a former president. The same with President Doe. Doe remains is unknown. At the TRC public hearing, Prince Johnson said that Doe was first killed and buried, and then he heard that Doe had magical powers, and if his body is not cremated, he might reappear, and and wreak havoc on people who killed him. So Doe bodies was exhumed and was cremated, and his ashes, according to Prince Johnson, through the TRC public hearings, were scattered across the Simpoa River. But the TRC actions of recommending a particular form of reburial, in my view, is intended to address the divisions between the so-called indigenous people and those of immigrant origin. The immigrant that we refer to as American Liberian has the whole definition of American Liberian has lost its meaning in a way. So using Afro immigrant, those of Afro immigrant ancestry, in my view, is one of the best way to describe it, because the American Liberians is no longer accurate, because there were those in the 1860s that came from West Indies,
Right.
recaptured slaves, from the Congo or captured from high seas. All of that has been packed into one, as American Liberian.
Right.
So Afro immigrant, is coming up as the main terminology now to describe Liberians who immigrated to the country after 1822.
So I asked this question before, specifically about President Doe. So by the time you say this, they say, "Oh, where's the grave of the other people that he killed in 1985? Where's the grave?" So what do we do in case in terms of something like this that is bringing up other controversies?
If in reaction to why
Assume the body of President Doe and give him a proper burial or do something to memorialize him. They say, "How about the other people he killed? They were never memorialized."
yeah, so The TRC recommendation is in consideration of the office that Doe held, the office that Tobo held. They were heads of state, and part of that recommendation is also trying to discourage any future revolt, that presidents do not deserve to be killed in this way. We may disagree with them, but to kill your president in the manner and form that Tobo and Doe were executed in is not a practice that in a decent society want to continue. We see in Guinea, the former security detail overthrew his former boss, and he's being kept on a house arrest. Uh, I mean, there was a use of force. Use of force is being condemned in ECOWAS, but you can see a certain minimum level of respect is being exercised. Where Alpha Conde is not being killed in a violent way. He's being held there, I'm sure, for his age. He may be having some health issue. He's being looked after. We can disagree, politically, but in terms of our common humanity, there has to be some rules. There has to be some minimum standard observed. The TRC report is trying to acknowledge that. In reaction to those that were killed during the political violence in the 80s, the TRC recommendations on every county should erect a memorial over a site of massacre. I think it tried to compensate. It tried to compensate for some of these losses of political leaders in different ways. And, Truth Commission report will not go down to every household. Truth Commission report will try to be as broad as possible to take care of a certain specific incident of violence as where necessary, but where it would try to deal with every single act of violence is a little unrealistic. Yeah.
Let's look at a few of these ones that talk about apology. The government should apologize to the people of Liberia for the conflict, to ECOMOG nations, and other foreign nationals. How does that help?
Yeah, so public apology is one of the the things that after a transitional justice process, the new government, because normally you have a government who is representing the state and who is expected to apologize on behalf of previous government, that I hereby apologize for what my predecessor did, for what happened on behalf of the Liberian state. We can guarantee that what happened in the past will never again be repeated. Normally, such an apology is intended to reassure the public, especially after a period of much violence, after a period of much hurt, to reassure the public and say, this new Liberian government, this new Liberian state that we are building, we can guarantee you that we will not go back to the dark areas. And normally, such an apology is done on television in Ghana. When the Ghanaian had, not many people know that Ghana had a Truth Commission. So when Ghana has a Truth Commission, there were, if I remember correctly, there were few families and individuals who were listed to receive reparations. People who were affected on the Rawlings regime. Each of those that were identified as victim, Kufo, the president, Samuel Kufo, then wrote a letter under the seal using the Ghanaian coat of arms, wrote a letter to every individual apologizing for what the Ghanaian government did under the regime of Jerry Rawlings, and promising to them, guaranteeing that what they went through, they will not go through that. Today, in some of those Ghanaian homes, they have that letter in a frame. That letter is in a frame, and as a personal statement to them and their own history of victimization. So, state apology can be done in so many different ways. Kufo wrote personal letters. In other countries, there can be a public statement made, maybe on the day of national independence. So it can take on different form, and it can have a more symbolic meaning depending on who is the president.
Yeah.
If the president is someone that people respect, and that also adds a lot of value, to what that apology mean to the society in general.
Yeah. I will skip on to the ones that talk about building a new political culture. Talk about the historicity and the memorialization. And here are the few things, right?
Yeah.
You know, building a new political culture, tolerance and respect for human rights of all people, including opposition. The government represents the people. You have the right to vote, which is nobody should violate. And about the partisan and all. Let's talk about the political culture. So the background here is most of what we suffer was political,
Hmm.
and hence we need a new political culture.
Yeah.
That is very important because what we see today. First, let's go over this political culture that we talk about, and then you can talk about them briefly.
Okay.
Partisan use of democratic institutions outlawed, political control of the military outlawed, culture of extermination of political opposition should be outlawed, political parties, party politics in the military, the civil servants, and these institutions should also be outlawed. Let's talk about those, the culture that the TRC want us to build.
So I think part of the TRC recommendation is really to appreciate some of these recommendations is really to appreciate what sort of democracy have we really had in
Yeah,
the past, and the democracy we really had just been presented as a democracy, but it really hasn't been fully functioning a democracy. So part of the TRC's recommendation here is to establish a new political culture of active citizen engagement, where where citizens understand their responsibilities, where citizens understand uh, their role as active citizens in a political party, what they're supposed to do, and the rest of it. So one of the recommendation in support of this recommendation is that there should be, it's called the Political Party Sustenance Act in the TRC report. The spirit of this recommendation is basically suggesting that new political parties should receive subsidies from the Liberian state, from the Liberian government, so that they can be able to establish, and the state can cover specific part of political parties operations. When I work at the governance commission, this issue was raised, and some of the members of the legislature was even considering it, to draft a law around it. There were a few controversy here. One, the first reaction was that if you have a Liberian government that is in trying to build and establish this new political culture, trying to fund a political party, it will lead to a political party being weak. That was one of the reaction. What I think other people didn't see the value in this is that, one, the current shape of our political party system is that it's controlled by one big person.
yeah,
One big man control the political party. If you have a new political culture where the Liberian state, as we see in other countries, the Liberian state is saying, all right, the issue of rent will be taken care of through annual subsidy, uh, certain kind of civic program, and it will be budgeted for, where students and citizens learn the constitution, learn the values of the party, and all of this will be covered for on a particular budget. What you do in that particular case is that you try to guarantee active political life after an election, so
yeah,
that after an election you will still have structured political engagement, and you do not wait for every time there is an election, then all the political parties, have a full-time job. So you guarantee, like you have in normal countries, every year, you have political activities, that is going through. So it's sort of a win-win
Yeah.
or win-win situation. You win, you get elected or not. The political party, the life of the political party doesn't stop, and
Right.
at the end of an election. So that was one thing. The second thing there is that with support from any government, with the government and taxpayer money using to develop political party, it shut down the door of having one big person influencing, how a political party is run. At the moment in Liberia, that is really the case.
Yeah.
And so the TRC vision here was basically, how do we restructure politics? How do we give everyone a chance? By ensuring one resources there to guarantee constant political engagement, to remove the whole big man idea
Yeah.
from in Liberian politics. So that's my own take on this particular recommendation that the TRC put forward. I thought it was very deeply thoughtful, actually.
Right. And
Yeah.
Aaron, some of these things are really simple, if I would like to say. I mean, what will it take a government to apologize? Why has some of these basic ones not been done yet? Even if you are not implementing the full TRC, why has it been a decade now? The TRC, as we say, is collecting dust. So what are some of these basic ones? Issuing apology to these countries, or giving President Turbo a proper burial and those kind of things. Why have they not been done? Any
That's a good question. I just did a small blog on Facebook. Burkina Faso 6 months ago established a tribunal, a military tribunal, to investigate its former president, Blaise Compaoré, over the assassination of Thomas Sankara 6 months ago. Today, the final verdict was released. The verdict found Blaise Compaoré guilty. He alone with I think 9 others. Two persons has been acquitted. In 6 months, Burkina Faso had the courage, had the political will to hold its former president accountable for something that happened 35 years ago, 36, 37 years ago. Liberia, this June will be 13 years since the TRC report was released. What the society has done, it has placed the TRC report on trial and not those who are naming the report. And you have and this is not just a matter of those in power. This now involves the ordinary Liberian who is coming to the constant defense of a member who he thinks and him share the same ethnic and religious identity. So this is now a matter of an ordinary person who's constantly coming to the defense of someone who we think, oh, this man I come from the same country, this man I belong to the same religion. I cannot allow this man issues of his guilt and his culpability to be discussed without coming to his defense. So we are talking about a national attitude that go against accountability. We're talking about a national attitude that go against important values such as justice. So this is not just the issue of, initially we thought that this was just the issue of a group of politicians, but this now involve ordinary Liberian, ordinary person walking on the street every day is working against issues of justice and accountability. It's not just the issue of politician anymore.
Thank you. And talking about that, let's look at an example of what you term as a controversial memorialization.
Mm-hmm.
In your paper, and this is the first time I'm hearing it when I read your paper, and I'm going to put that image on the screen. You said in Nimba County, Prince Yomi Johnson's towering monument in the town of Ganta on the stretch of road to Saclapie looms large in every life as it does in the country's post-ethnic conflict. And the monument is entitled Touch of Freedom. Let's see if the image is big enough for my viewers to see that. That's the monument of Prince Yomi Johnson, and it reads, Here stands the lasting memory of the revolutionary hero of Nimba County, General Prince Yomi Johnson, a statesman, politician, and evangelist of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who freed the people of Nimba County and Liberia. Let me reread for emphasis. Here stands the lasting memory of a revolutionary hero of Nimba County, General Prince Yomi Johnson, a statesman, politician, and evangelist of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who freed the people of Nimba County and Liberia. And the question here is, I didn't know that. I think there's a Bible in his hand.
That's correct.
And it's often said, one man's terrorist is another man's hero.
So this is a very good. I'm glad you brought this up. So initially, you were asking, what was I suggesting, or why do I suggest that the state play a major role in how the past is remembered? So to counter that phrase you just made, that one man hero is another man terrorist, sometimes the role of the state in how the past is interpreted is very important to narrow down the range of permissible lies, if we can call it that. So with the state getting involved and saying, all right, according to the TRC investigation, this man was guilty of doing this, he was guilty for doing this, he was guilty for doing that. By doing that, through a very fair and transparent investigation, you establish wrongdoing and those who commit the wrong. In that process, you wouldn't have people coming up. Even if they come up, it will be very unpopular to do that and say, this man is a hero. So because the Liberian TRC final report released 13 years ago, much hasn't been done. So you have someone like Prince Johnson, who is reinventing himself after the war and trying to play to the majority of the Liberian population. The census, 2008 census is those who are 35 and below constitute 65% of the population. That suggests most of those who are in that age gap are those who were born 1990 and after. So these are people with our independent view on the conflict. So Prince Johnson is having a very good time with a younger generation of the society, and not those who were born in the 80s and 70s or prior. So he's talking to a group of people who, one, do not have the benefit of reading through a curriculum that can give him a clear and independent account of his role in the conflict. He's talking to a group of people who are not going to school. He speaks a local language to them and tell them what he wants them to hear. So this is one of the downsides when the state is not involved in trying to help the younger generation understand what the conflict was about. You have a few politicians, very opportunistic about what they want the future to be like, go down and exploit, the ignorance, of the larger majority. So this is what we're having in Liberia. A guy like Prince Johnson establishes a church, and he goes there. His platform is there to reinvent himself. He's not a guy who went to a seminary, who is committed to the true interpretations of the Bible. Every attempt, at using the sermon, using the church, is there to further entrench his position. By the carefully manipulation of his role in the Liberian conflict, and to always interpret the Bible in ways that make him to appear like a reformed person.
Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to read our comments and take some calls, and we can draw down the curtains. Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. Our discussion today is on the TRC recommendation. What does the TRC say when it comes to wartime memories and rewriting Liberia's history? How do we change our political culture? My guest is Mr. Aaron Weir. He's joining us from the UK. He's a transitional justice expert. At this time, we're going to take some our comments from our viewers, and at the same time, we want to remind our viewers that you can call and be a part. We have less than 20 minutes or 15 minutes to go, but you can call and be a part of the conversation by calling this number 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. Let's take some comments here. Margaret A. Mapudazan, I have family members who left and no one had a clue as of today. Very close family members too. And most time I look in a crowd hoping for a glimpse of them. Maybe they don't remember things I usually think. This one from Elvis Morris, I haven't healed from the scars that the Civil War left. I wasn't born during the regime, the Ring of Door, but the atrocity that his government committed stained our tribe. People now stigmatize you because of tribe. He continues, very profound. I experienced that very thing after learning more about the Civil War and what led to and how few ethnic groups were put against each other. Our divide is quiet but present. Raymond Clark said, Mr. Aaron Weir, I'm not sure if it will be easy to erase the memories of your loved ones. Dave Ja, the war is part of our history. It is part of the Liberian experience. It is lazy for anyone to suggest that we should not write about our history or document nothing about the experience of the Liberian people. Faflin said the last few are very important, talking about the TRC recommendations. Martha McIntosh, those Liberian murder on the post, including the 250,000 lives lost, should really be memorialized. Ellen's administration should have actually done that. Evans also say, I'm watching this with tears in my eyes and anger in my heart. Dave also said, be careful with the legal entanglement that may come along if the government of Liberia apologizes to too many foreign nations and people. Mayfield Deco, I think subsidizing political parties could lead to proliferation of too many by just anyone. Many of such parties could come about just to get a piece of the pie. Swab Mapu said, our people are confused and traumatized and more stubborn. Here, one man's hero is another man's terrorist. Wilton Carter, yes, some of the TRC actors are using this important historic event politically and hypocritically to attack some of the people they call witnesses. Aaron, those are a few of the comments. We also have callers, so quickly respond to which one you can.
Yeah, all right. So I'm taking some notes as you read them. So the missing person thing, I think as we discussed, it is still a big thing. Imagine leaving your loved ones, leave the house, and they never come back. So people are still there, hoping that one day there will be this surprise that they will see this loved one after 30 years, after 25 years. So as this person said, that they're still looking in the crowd, one day they'll be surprised to see this person. That's why the recommendation to issue a death certificate by the government is there, to help interrupt, this perpetual form of mourning, so that people come to terms with the fact that if you didn't see your loved ones 10 years after the conflict, 15 years after the conflict, it is painful to accept that this person, was killed in a war or died. However painful it is, people have to move on and come to terms with such a difficult reality. The tribal stigma, that our other colleague talk about, is there. I mean, I was part of, when I was in Liberia, I was head of I was the country director for this American NGO, and we did this survey. And this survey said majority of Liberians uh, think that certain ethnic group, is violent. For example, those coming from the ethnic group of Kios, Manos, and Krans, and Mandingos, according to this study, are perceived to be violent. And intermarriages in some of these ethnic groups is reduced out of fear, and that if you marry into this group, uh, you you might be perceived to be in a certain way. I mean, this is a study as recent as 2018, when I was heading this American NGO. So these are legacy coming out of the Civil War. Some of these perceptions may be really unfounded, but this is how Liberians are interpreting the war. These are the new relationships, that are coming out of the war, and it's dangerous, to have a whole ethnic group to be stigmatized in this particular way. So there are real empirical data, to validate some of the concerns by this caller or this person who sent a message around tribal stigma is there. And then it is also linked to the comment the third person made around the tribal divide that appears to have gone away, but is still there. There is still a sense of a tribal divide. And then I can agree more with the other message that memory is hard to be erased. Memory is part of our identity. And, it's shape us in the present, what we are, what our past, is shaped by the memory we still carry. To lose your memory is to lose your identity. You cannot easily depart with memory. It's really uh, inseparable in a way. And then lastly, the political party financing. I should have mentioned that the draft law was discussing the criteria of parties to benefit. And I think part of the criteria that was being considered was that the first two parties or the first three parties that produced the highest number of seats in the legislature. So it was not finite political party financing any party. There was thresholds that was to be established. If you perform this well, maybe the first three parties that perform well on the election will be considered for political party financing. And even at that, the financing will be done in a way that it funds specific activity
Yeah.
and not just anything, and it will be audited and all of that. I know it's a tricky thing, but we haven't tried it before.
Right.
It doesn't hurt to try. So let me stop there, and we can take calls from
Right.
people calling.
The first one here is Elvis Morris. Elvis, you're live. Question or comment?
Thank you so much, Mr. John. Usually, I like to come in and make my comments quickly and then get off the line. But I would beg your indulgence tonight to just give me a couple of minutes to let you say a few things because this is quite emotional. Um, you know, I came to the United States when I was 10 years old, so I didn't fully understand, the history of the war and everything that happened, until, 2 years ago when I started to research and really take an interest in history and, the Civil War and really started to investigate. For example, I was in a relationship previously, and what the guest said is exactly what happened to me. I'm a regular guy. I'm quite nice, quite generous most of the time. And simply because of my tribe, my ex-mom refused that she wouldn't let her daughter date a crime person because exactly what the terrorists state. They're perceived as evil people, human beings or this terrible monster, people. And this is a cool person who I would look at as somebody who is tribally related to me.
Yeah.
It's not coming from a Gill person, but it seemed like that stigma has been, thrown all around the country, and we are looked at as this terrible group of people. For my current situation, I'm married to a woman who is cool, but her mother is Gill, and we get along just fine. And then even looking at the history, amongst other tribes who come from the Mende group, the Crown people are mostly tied to the Gill people, especially in Ivory Coast, and we're quite a close-knit people when it comes to culture, relations. So it's like our biggest enemy now, it seems to be from tribes who we're in direct conflict with, but people who perceive us to be a certain way because of propaganda that happened during the war. And the reason I'm angry, like I said in my comments, is because, number one, why did it take so long for the TRC recommendations to be implemented? And what can we as a people do? Forget the government, because the government is supposed to serve us, but it seems like we serve the government in Liberia. But now, what can we as the civil societies, what pressure can we put on the government? I asked this question on one of your last shows. I think you recommended that I call on this show, so I asked that question. I'm sure he's not a lawyer, but what options do we have? Because it seems like our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do. Like I said in my earlier comments, this is something that affects me personally, and I wasn't even born during the 1990s. I was born in 1992 when Doe was gone, when all of his atrocities that he committed was gone, and I was just a child who was born, through a bloodline. My mother is biased, my father is kind. My father is one of the nicest people I know. He never took part in the war. He's a kind man. We live in Congo Town back where a lot of people know him. We knew ministers. We knew a lot of people. People know my father. He's not a terrible man. But that stigma of the tribe is follow us for many, many years. So it's like I'm trapped into something that I was born into, and it's affecting me in a way that I don't know how to release myself from it. So my question to your guest again is like, what's stopping us from fully healing, and what's stopping us from pushing for the implementation of the TRC? Because I really do think that will bring some closure, and that will also bring some reconciliation amongst different tribes. Thank you again, Mr. John, for taking my call.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Aaron. Please mark that down. Let me get Mr. Wilton Ketter. Mr. Ketter, you are live.
Thank you so much, brother John. Thank you to your guests in the studio. Well, to address some of the issues about this TRC, I think the Liberian war and the victims, concerned are very legitimate. The people that conducted the TRC later on down the road, I think they were being very deceptive, and the fact that they were targeting certain group of people and not the other group that participated was wrong. I think the idea of giving Liberian justice, giving closure to families that lost their loved ones, that property was damaged and all this kind of stuff, putting our country back is important. But when you start to politicize and play trickery with the Liberian people, feeling them there where we have problems, I think the TRC stuff, if you go back and watch it, they call all the people who stood up there and gave their testimony witnesses. And they said these things would not be used against you in any court. Any court. Today, they are talking about bringing people to justice. When in fact, Liberians sat together, some of the people who represented the different constituencies went together and said, let bargain be bargain. All the people that fought our civil war should not be prosecuted. Let bargain be, let put it behind us and move forward. And I think by then, those people that were saying those things, they knew their interest.
Right.
Now it has become, fast forward, any administration, we didn't hear a lot of people talking about bringing Prince Johnson to justice, because Prince Johnson gave Johnson the chance to be president of Liberia. Now that he gave George Weah a chance, they should bring him to justice when George Weah leaves, and probably give somebody else the chance and ensure, and then they're going to acquire that thing now. They should start playing games with Liberian people. I think it's about time that we'll be sincere with our country, to move our nation forward. We'll be sincere. All of us embrace our civil war. All of us. And so if we will find a common ground, like the European will say Prince is not a hero, the Madinga will say Alaji Kroma is the hero, the Congo will say Charles is the hero. At the end of the day, we got to find a common ground where we can solve our problem and put it behind us instead of creating more mess.
And Wilton, before you go, what is that common ground? What do you suggest?
I think we should have true unification. True unification. That unification thing will be observing the way back in the days. We should have real true unification.
How?
The last caller that spoke.
How we do that?
And said, okay, I'm coming. The last caller that spoke and said, he was born probably in the 90s and experienced the war, but yeah, he's experiencing something that has to do with the tribe, accepting his wife or his that other one. These things are not happening because of our civil war. It was in Liberia way before.
Yeah, just conclude, Wilton. How do we do the unification?
How do we do it, we have to look ourselves as, first of all, individual Liberians and look themselves in the mirror and try to make that change within themselves.
I did already in myself.
To that stage. Eh?
I said I did already. So tell me how, as a country.
If you look there, as a nation, we should come together and have this dialogue where we can put all our grievances on the table, where the indigenous people can come with their own grievances, where the settlers and people can come with their own, all the political parties can come with their own opinion, put on the table and say, okay, this is where we are. Because if you look at it historically, everybody hurt everybody.
All right.
That is why we are here today.
Thank you.
Not simply on one group of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me bring the last caller here. That's Mr. Kesali Doba. Mr. Doba, you're live.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Dennis, and thanks to your studio guests. One thing I took into consideration into the whole TRC process was that while it's true that the perpetrators, the victims were mentioned in the document, I think not too much of priority was given to the victim. There was little, and I think the victim needed more than what is got in that document. Just recognizing them and doing. I really wanted the victims, like some of who lost our family. Financial compensation wouldn't have brought them back to life, but it would have helped some of the families that they left behind. Some of those people who lost, their father, their mother, who was breadwinners for them. If the government had actually put into place some financial compensation into the TRC, it would have done a huge lot for them. And for me, I'm one of those who believe that just mere discussion and coming to tell me sorry and find a way of healing this thing will not work until I have justice. If I don't have justice for my late uncle, I just don't believe that nothing has been done.
Thank you.
So just find a way and say, let's just go ahead and memorialize people and just discuss it on the surface and let bygone be bygone. I don't think there is any true healing process without justice. So justice, in my mind, will be the way forward for real and total reconciliation. If no justice, there is no reconciliation for me.
Thank you, Aliyu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aaron.
Yeah.
You heard our callers.
Yes. I think this is a very thoughtful reaction to the TRC process. It clearly comes from people who follow it, people who have been concerned and in some way angry about where we are and where things stand. And I think it's a fair assessment. Let me begin with the first reaction. One, what is stopping us from implementing the TRC report? Well, that's a question that I myself have asked. And the TRC report was submitted in 2009, when President Salif was just, I think, 3 years as president, and somehow she didn't do much, including when she was re-elected in 2012, when she became president in 2012. The TRC didn't benefit from much of her program, much of her priority. And many people think that should have been a good opportunity, to really establish the foundation for the TRC. Part of the reason why is because the president is also listed in the report, and there's a recommendation of public sanction that she shouldn't have ran in the election in the 2011 general presidential election. So some of the reason why there was very limited political will to implement the TRC report is because not just President Sirleaf, but then you have a sitting associate justice in the presence of Kabina Janet, who was also is also mentioned in the report, and he's recommended for public sanction. You also have a member of the legislature who also listed in the report. It's important to draw a small comparison here with Sierra Leone, Liberia. In 1999, the Sierra Leone had a Lome Peace Agreement. In the Lome Peace Agreement, those who were not involved with the conflict were given a country, and to sort of reorganize and to establish. That's how you see Tijan Kaba, who was never part of the conflict, came on board. In Liberia, the reverse happened. Those who did not win an outright military victory during the war were given a chance of power sharing. So at the end of the conflict, the people who sat around the table were people who were historically involved with the conflict. So you have a truth commission that gave them a recommendation in which they have been indicted and say, go and implement this report. So that is the dilemma with the Liberian process.
Go hang yourself. So what he's asking there is, so what can we do as a people to force the government hand to do something?
So this was where there was much expectation from George Weah, who was never involved with the conflict, that he would take over. And this is the closest Liberia has ever came to turning this thing around was in the presidency of George Weah. But we're seeing George Weah politics is no different from the regular Liberian politician politics. If we miss an opportunity with George Weah, it's difficult to imagine where are we going to get it right. If someone like George Weah, who is on record in 2004 for calling for the War Crimes Court, who was then the UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, that's the closest the country has come to someone who has not really been involved with the war. And look at where we are today. He doesn't even have conversation about this. He's not even concerned about it. It's very frustrating for people who put so much faith and trust in him, for him to be so disconnected from issues of reconciliation, issues of justice, something that he previously was very much involved with, or made public statements that endorse the idea of justice and accountability. Today, he doesn't want to be involved with that. And then the third point is victims have very little. There were very little said about victims in the final report. On that note, I mean, Truth Commission report generally are victim centered and in different ways. So I think the third caller point was about specific mention of victims, like the way
compensation.
Perpetrators were mentioned, names were mentioned in the report, alleged perpetrators' name were mentioned in the report. So on economic crimes, you have a long list of those who the TRC recommended for further investigation. On the category of most notorious perpetrator, you have a list of all those who had the warring factions. You have and you have a long list of perpetrators. So the report, in a way, is very much inundated with those alleged perpetrators, and you don't have such lists of victims. And people who lost their parents, people who lost this. So I think this is where this caller is coming from. If you're having a long list of alleged perpetrators, including categories of most notorious perpetrators, why not have a list, of those most victimized in the Liberian conflict? I think this is where this caller is coming from, and I agree with you. The TRC had enough data. They collected 22,000 statements from across the country. They held 800 public hearings in Liberia. They held diaspora hearings. They had quite a bit to come up with, even a list, a reduced list of victims, and a well-defined category of who these particular victims are, and to be able to have it in a report. I totally agree that something along those lines should have been considered. But as it stands, the report currently is very heavy on those who are accused of causing much problem. Yeah.
And what's about compensation? Because someone is agreeing here. Dave say Kessley is right. If TRC has included financial compensation for non-governmental victims, Liberian will have been on fire for the implementation of TRC. So if they say, well, the people in my town of Dodo can get, 1 million, maybe it will be walking from Sino to the mansion to make sure it's implemented.
I'm not sure I follow the logic of this recommendation. Please rephrase for me again.
Compensation. So
yeah,
if like the specific site we mentioned, where like Dupo Road.
Yeah.
And so the people in Dupo Road supposed to be compensated $1 million to rebuild their lives. Their city or town were destroyed.
Okay.
Maybe if people see that direct financial benefit, they will be on fire for the TRC to be implemented.
Yeah, I hear you. Yes, I mean that's that sounds like a strategy that people are contemplating now. Why did the TRC not do this to energize the process of implementation? But I think one of the main problem here is not just the fact that the government, is currently has a mix of different people have different competing agendas. Some people
Yeah.
are in government to protect certain people from being accountable. Other people are there who sees an opportunity in a certain individual. So long that individual is protected, he will continue to provide an opportunity for re-election and the rest of it. What I think is the major problem here is how Liberians are a little indifferent about the whole concept of justice and accountability. Uh, Liberians, every time a warlord dies or a perpetrator dies, go on Facebook and see the number of justification. Even with the TRC report that has established the different violations the person, as head of a warring faction, may have committed. See how Liberians have come in there to rationalize and stand behind this person because, one, they come from the same ethnic group, two, they're part of the same religion. So we have a role. We have to take part of the blame as a country. The blame cannot just be entirely for those in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and in the presidency. Part of the blame that we all have to acknowledge and share in is our failure as ordinary citizens, to be a little hard on those who represent us. So I think that the national attitude towards accountability, is just not here nor there. And today, Liberians are surprised that so much rape is happening, when in fact the roots and the history of rape go back to the conflict years when it was okay, to violate a woman. And after war, if you've done nothing in terms of accountability, what do you think such violent attitude go? They remain in the society. They don't go away. They don't go away. And so issue of rape, and it's a product of our society now. It will remain there unless we found a way to address this. You find 3 years old kids getting raped, 5 years old kids getting raped, and people are shocked. People shouldn't be shocked. This is part of the conflict, the legacy of the conflict. It is now part of our life conditions. We have to coexist. We have to coexist with this because that practice of taking advantage of someone was introduced during the war, and we've never been able, to get rid of it. That's why processes like transitional justice are there to help turn society to turn a new page, to turn a new leaf. Why are we shocked when people are being raped, when the same people today are still part of the different fighting units and still part of being re-elected into office, and then we surprised that these things are still there. They will not go away unless we take the right action.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for your time here tonight. We will take your closing comment, but before we do that, let's get what's coming tomorrow. Tomorrow, Thursday at 7 p.m., we have Tough Talking Thursday. And this is where you have the best political panel on the planet who will be here to discuss the following. President Sirleaf raised the issue of the darkness or lack of stable supply of power at the Rwanda International Airport and lamented the current state of the Governance Commission under President Weah. Vice President Jewel Howard Taylor blames parents for the spike in the number of rape cases and other forms of sexual-based violence. Will the Unity Party, after leaving the CPP, be able to fill a candidate in its own name? We're going to talk about that. Also, former Ambassador Linda Greensfield said Liberia's foremost problem is corruption. And also, the chairman of the NDC, Mr. Alaric Towa, says the domestic policy of the government of Liberia is based on stealing, while the foreign policy is based on begging. For all that and more, join me, the host, our guest and panelists, Wilmot Weti Kone, Carl Famule, Mohammed Sharif, Massa Washington, and will be joined by the former FIU boss, Mr. Alex Coffey. to sort this all out. Aaron, again, thank you so much for coming. Your parting comments, and then we can draw down the curtains.
Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much, Dennis Jar. This is really a welcome. This is a welcome initiative across Liberia. No one is talking about transitional justice. It's an idea that people in government do not like, and so if you talk about it on radio stations and journalists try to avoid it. So it's important that every time you have an idea and run a program about this, people participate. You see the level of text message that came through, the comments, the very thoughtful comments that came from some of the callers. This is an important subject, and that I hope that in your busy schedule, in your different programming, at least you find the time to bring more Liberians on to talk about this. Hopefully, just hopefully, the more we talk about it, we may have the right people, especially as we move into an election year. We might just have the right people with the right courage to say, all right, enough is enough. Let's get to work on this. Let's see how we can do the minimum to turn the society around. So on this note, I know it's late. It's almost 1 o'clock my time in Belfast. So let me say thank you again, and I hope that you have more such program. Whenever I'm called upon, it will be my pleasure to come and sit in studio with you to share my little ideas on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And Priscilla Ginato joined me to say thank you, Aaron. Elvis Morris said this. Thank you. This discussion was much needed. We as Liberians need to have this honest and tough conversation. There are other parts that we didn't cover today, especially one presented by our CDC friend, Mr. Wilton Ketter, say, hey, the CDC, the TRC was hypocritical. They didn't do it Ellen time. Now they want to do it George Weah time. I let that go so that we can call you back so we can address some of those issues. Again, thank you so much. We want to thank our viewers for watching and always being here at Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. At this time, we're going to end with our song that says, we are all Liberians. Whether you believe the TRC report should be implemented like yesterday, or we are all victims and we are all responsible, and so it shouldn't be, we are all Liberians. What we should do, though, is to do whatever it takes to make our country a glorious land of liberty, to advocate for justice, fair play, that we all be treated equally. Like for those of us who love parents and loved ones, hey man, nobody says sorry. You can go to court and we have to bow and worship the people, the perpetrators, so that we can earn a living, because the people that were responsible for the atrocities became our leaders, and they crave worship from us. That is sad. But I want to remind you, we are all Liberians, and we must do our best to make our country the best among the rest. Good night, and God bless you.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.